You walk into a room you've never been in, and for 2 or 3 seconds, you are absolutely certain you've stood in this exact spot before. Same light, same conversation, same feeling in your chest. Then it's gone, and you're left standing there, slightly dizzy, wondering what just happened. You call it deja vu, but the real answer is far stranger. Your brain isn't glitching. It's trying to warn you about something, and most people never stop long enough to listen. Here's the first strange fact. Deja vu isn't rare. Surveys suggest roughly 2 out of every 3 people will experience it at some point, most often between the ages of 15 and 25, and less often as people get older. That age pattern alone is a clue, and we'll come back to it. But first, you need to understand what deja vu actually is, because for most of history, nobody could study it properly. It comes and goes in seconds. You can't schedule it. You can't summon it on demand in a laboratory. So for decades, deja vu sat in the same category as ghosts and lucky numbers. Interesting to talk about. Impossible to test. Then, in the early 2000s, a memory researcher named Cleary at Colorado State University had an idea. What if she could recreate the conditions of deja vu using virtual reality? Cleary's team built detailed virtual scenes, gardens, junkyards, hospital rooms, each one carefully designed to share a specific spatial layout with a completely different scene shown earlier. Same arrangement of objects, same general shape, but different content, different context, different everything else. Participants explored one scene and later walked through the other one, the one with the matching layout but no obvious surface connection to the first. The results were remarkable. Participants frequently reported the eerie feeling of deja vu, even though they could not recall the earlier scene that was actually driving the sensation. Their brains recognized the underlying spatial pattern. Their conscious memory did not. This gave Cleary a testable explanation. Deja vu may be what happens when a current situation strongly resembles something you've genuinely experienced before, closely enough that your brain's familiarity system fires, but not closely enough for you to consciously identify the source. You feel the echo of memory without hearing the actual note. Your brain says, "I know this," while your conscious mind says, "But I have no idea why," which reframes the entire experience. Deja vu isn't a malfunction. It's evidence that your memory system works in 2 separate layers, and for a brief moment, you get to feel one layer operating without the other. Here's where it gets more interesting. In 2004, psychologist Alan Brown at Southern Methodist University published one of the most comprehensive reviews of deja vu research ever assembled, drawing together decades of scattered studies into a single picture. Brown cataloged dozens of proposed explanations, ranging from neurological misfires to genuine memory-based accounts, and one detail stood out clearly across the research. Deja vu happens more often to people who travel frequently, who are more educated, and who tend to remember their dreams. In other words, it correlates most strongly with people who are exposed to a wide, varied stream of new experiences and environments. Why would that matter? Because if deja vu is triggered by partial match recognition, the more raw material your brain has stored, hallways, rooms, conversations, dream fragments, the more opportunities exist for a new moment to partially overlap with something old. Deja vu, in this light, isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It may actually be a side effect of having a rich, well-stocked memory system that is constantly, quietly comparing the present to the past. And that explains something else Brown noted. Deja vu peaks in your late teens and 20s and then gradually declines with age, which seems backwards at first. Shouldn't older people with far more life experience stored away have more raw material for partial matches, not less? The likely answer involves a different piece of the puzzle entirely, and this is where a third researcher becomes essential. Chris Moulin, a cognitive neuroscientist who has spent years studying memory disorders, has focused specifically on cases where deja vu goes wrong, not too little, but too much. Moulin studied patients with certain forms of dementia who experience something now called déjà vu, a persistent, overwhelming sense that ordinary, brand-new moments are being relived, so intensely that some patients refuse to watch the news because they insist they've already seen it, or avoid appointments because they believe, with complete conviction, that they've already been. Moulin's research pointed to a breakdown in the checking mechanism your brain normally uses to evaluate a false memory signal. In healthy déjà vu, part of your brain briefly says, "This feels familiar," while another part quickly steps in and says, "But that's not actually possible. I know I haven't been here." That second voice, the reality check, is doing enormous work in those 2 or 3 seconds, and it's precisely what appears to fail in déjà vu. Which means ordinary, fleeting déjà vu isn't your brain glitching. It's your brain's dual checking system working exactly as intended. A strange signal fires, briefly, and then gets correctly overridden by your rational judgment before it can take hold. So what is déjà vu actually trying to tell you when it works the way it should? It's telling you that your memory system is running a background comparison process almost constantly, silently checking new experiences against a vast, half-buried archive of old ones, most of which you'll never consciously access again. Most of the time, this process is invisible. You walk into 10,000 rooms across your life and feel nothing unusual because most of them don't partially match anything stored deeply enough to surface. But every so often, the layout of a room, the tone of a conversation, the exact quality of afternoon light comes close enough to some buried fragment, maybe a half-remembered dream, maybe a moment from childhood you can't consciously name, that the recognition system fires before the recall system can catch up. For those 2 or 3 seconds, you are essentially watching your own memory architecture in action, live, uncensored, before your conscious mind manages to catch up and rationalize it. It's one of the only times you get to observe the machinery of memory rather than simply experience its finished product. Here's the twist that should genuinely change how you feel about déjà vu. Most people treat it as an eerie, almost supernatural blip, evidence of parallel lives or forgotten dreams. But based on Cleary's research, Brown's synthesis, and Moulin's clinical work, the truer story is almost the opposite. Déjà vu is evidence that your memory system is healthy, active, and constantly doing its job of comparing your present to your past, and that your brain's built-in reality check is functioning exactly as it should, catching the false alarm within seconds and correcting it. The next time it happens, resist the urge to treat it as mysterious. Treat it as informative. Something about this exact moment, its shape, its rhythm, its light, has partially matched something buried deep in your memory that you may never consciously recover. You'll likely never know exactly which memory triggered it, but you now know something more useful than the source. You know the mechanism. 2 systems, briefly out of sync, correcting themselves in real time in under 3 seconds, without you ever noticing the machinery until this very moment. You walk into a room you've never been in. For 2 or 3 seconds, you are certain you've stood in this exact spot before. But now you know what that feeling really is, and the strangest part isn't the sensation itself. It's that your brain does this checking, silently, correctly, thousands of times across your life. And this is simply the one time in 10,000 where you actually got to feel it happen.